Recording by Leanne Howlett. Peggy's Trial by Mary Knight Potter. Chapter 1. A Disappointment. Peggy Clayton stood on the front steps with her 10-year-old forehead puckered into half-century wrinkles. She had followed her father out of the house, watched him toss his medicine case up to Jim in the buggy, climb in himself, wave a last good-bye, and drive up the street at a speed which soon whisked them around the corner out of sight. As this was what happened every morning, there was apparently no reason for the lines on the forehead or the deep sigh with which she turned slowly into the house. She had hardly shut the door before a voice shouted, "Did you ask him? What did he say?" Along with the words, a small boy came sliding down the banisters and landed in triumph on his feet beside her. "Ted," said his sister severely, "you are a bad boy. You know Nurse said you were not to slide down those banisters with your new suit on." "Bother Nurse," answered Teddy, nevertheless surveying two short trouser legs with some apprehension. "Did Father say you could?" he added impatiently. Peggy drew him into the office and closed the door. "I never got a chance to ask him," she said disconsolately. "He was giving Nurse directions about Harry's foot, and then Mr. Carter came in." "Mr. Carter!" exclaimed Teddy in surprise. "Why, he went more than half an hour ago. Why didn't you ask then?" Peggy opened the door, looked up and down the hall, and shut it carefully again before she answered. "Nurse was there right after and told about our going down to the river yesterday, and she said she was sure Harry got his foot hurt climbing over the stone wall, and he left word that we were never to go there again without asking permission first." "Bother!" said Teddy with all the emphasis that word could carry. "Well, why didn't you ask him after that?" Peggy looked at him scornfully. "With Nurse just complaining about us? He'd have said no, sure." "Nurse is always complaining," said Teddy, wagging his head judicially. "If you wait to ask till she isn't saying disagreeable things, you'll never get the party." "And besides," added Peggy forlornly, "if I don't have it Thursday, Cora May will be gone." Cora May was a visitor in town. Teddy had decided more than 2 weeks before, which was almost immediately after her arrival, that she was much the prettiest and nicest girl he knew, except of course Peggy. No one so far had ever been superior to Peggy. The party without Cora May, therefore, struck him as being ridiculous and not to be considered for a minute. "If Nurse hadn't been so hateful," he scolded, "we could have had the party all right without asking him at all." "Well," replied Peggy, "we can't ask him now, for he won't be home till late this evening, and Cook says if she doesn't know today she won't have time to make the cake." Just then Nurse's voice was heard reminding them that if they didn't hurry they would be late for school. "It's always school time," grumbled Ted. "Wish I'd hurt my foot instead of Harry. He always does have the luck." "I don't call it much luck to have to sit in a chair all day with your foot on another," said Peggy. "It's foolish to make a fuss about going to school," she added virtuously. "'Tisn't a bit more foolish," flared Teddy, "than to make a fuss about an old party. I don't care if you don't have one at all." His nose was as high in the air as that already turned up article would go. Peggy's feelings were much hurt. "You are pretty mean," she sputtered. "I'll tell Cora May you don't want her to come. Then I guess she'll think you are polite." She pursed up her lips tightly as she put on her things and started off at a rapid pace down the street. Teddy followed, tugging at the jacket Peggy usually helped him into. Just then, around the corner, came a bright-eyed, charmingly dressed young lady. She called a cheerful greeting to the children. The two gave a simultaneous shout and threw themselves bodily upon her. The young lady was Miss Edith Barton. She was Peggy's Sunday school teacher, and quite the loveliest lady, according to all three Clayton children, that ever lived. "It seems to me," said Miss Barton, after a moment's survey of the two flushed faces, "that all is not quiet on the Potomac. What's up, youngsters?" "We've both been cross," answered Peggy. Her honesty did not incline her to take more than her share of the blame. "But the real trouble is that I wanted to ask Father if I couldn't have a party Thursday for Cora May, and I didn't get a chance. Now I shan't see him till tonight, and that will be too late for the cook to know." "I should think Nurse would settle that matter," said Miss Barton. "She doesn't want us to have one," confessed Peggy. "But it's just because she wants to go away that afternoon, and she thinks we can't have a party without her." Ted's voice expressed great scorn. Miss Barton's eyes twinkled. "Nurse has had the care of you so long," she said apologetically, "you can't wonder she thinks you need her all the time. But perhaps we can persuade her to delegate her authority." Teddy's eyes opened and Peggy bent her brow in a frown. The meaning of such big words was beyond them. Miss Barton laughed and pinched Peggy's cheek. "Which means that if somebody else, almost as old and as wise as Nurse is herself, could be there, perhaps she would agree to the party." "There isn't anybody else so old," said Peggy gloomily, "and she thinks she's the only person who knows anything about taking care of children." The young lady studied the two, her eyes laughing. Peggy's coat looked as if it might have been brushed a week ago. Her skirt had a rip in it which evidently was not a very recent happening. Teddy's boots perhaps could be dirtier, but probably would not look so. The laugh went out of Miss Barton's eyes and a little flush crept up her cheeks. She suddenly bent down and kissed Peggy. "Nurse has had a good deal of experience," she said, "and I am afraid you don't always make it as easy for her as you might. But I think she will agree to this other wise lady taking her place. Because you see," she straightened Teddy's necktie as she spoke, "the wise lady is myself." Peggy gave a whoop that would have done credit to the lungs of a youthful Apache and threw both arms about the waist of the lady. "Will you? Aren't you good? Ted, Ted, do you hear?" The small boy didn't seem fully to realize the blessing so suddenly descended upon him. "We can have the party. Miss Barton's going to be there." "If you don't hurry up and get to school," said this straightener of difficulties, "you'll be kept in so late Thursday you won't have any time for a party at all. Run along, children, and I'll go up to the doctor's and tell Nurse." End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Peggy's Trial by Mary Knight Potter. Recording by Leanne Howlett. The party. After that, of course, there was no more trouble. Harry at first felt greatly aggrieved that Peggy should have any party at all when he couldn't join in the games. To his mind, the presence or absence of Cora May was a matter of minor importance. "She's only an outside girl," he complained. "She isn't your brother like me." Luckily for the family's peace, Miss Barton understood the art of soothing small boys' hurts. Thursday afternoon, when Peggy and Ted got home, they found Harry in his new white piqué suit, with all signs of disturbance gone. Nurse had already left, and Miss Barton helped him dress. She had beguiled the time with such exciting stories of Indians and cowboys that he forgot his lame foot. Moreover, she had promised that next month, on his 8th birthday, she would take him to Scranton to see Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. That was the finishing balm for Harry's wounded spirit. Neither Ted nor Peggy had ever been to the Wild West show. With such an exciting prospect before him, he was able to view with cheerfulness the better times of the other two this afternoon. The party was to be outdoors, with games on the big lawn and tea in the orchard. A hand organ man came into town that morning, and Miss Barton secured him at once for orchestra. At 4 o'clock most of the children had arrived, and as they trooped out of the house, he wound out the strains of a lively march. Miss Barton and Harry sat on the piazza with trays full of bright-hued ribbon rosettes. Each boy took one from Miss Barton, while Harry passed his to the girls. Those whose rosettes matched in color were thus made partners. The first thing Miss Barton said was to be a grand march, and she chose Peggy and Dickie Aiken for leaders. Up and down, around and across, the two piloted the line. Dickie was as full of brilliant ideas as Peggy, and the maneuvers they managed between them were wonderful to see. In the very center of the lawn was a tall pole decorated with wreaths of flowers. Long colored ribbons hung from its top, two of them being decidedly shorter than the others. Toward the end of their convolutions, Peggy and Dick led their followers into a circle about this pole. Then Miss Barton clapped her hands and commanded them all to stop just where they were. She told each child to take the end of one of the floating ribbons, reserving the shortest two for Peggy and Dick. "Now," she said, "you two are to dance to the music, and whatever kind of step you take, the ring outside is to imitate it. No matter what figures you make, none of you must drop the ribbons." Then the organ reeled out a gay waltz. Peggy and Dick faced each other and started into a most remarkable exhibition of high kicking all about the pole. It was not easy, they found, always to keep the ribbon's ends, to dance in step, and at the same time to continue circling about the pole. At the end of 2 minutes, Miss Barton clapped her hands again. Peggy and Dick dropped the short ends and two others took their places. Thus it went on till all the couples had been leaders. Of course, each pair tried to outdo those who had gone before. Most of them attempted all sorts of funny antics, jumping as high as they could and filling in the pauses of the music with ridiculous bows and curtsies. Cora May's turn came last of all. By means known only to himself, Ted had managed to be her partner. Now Ted was not noted as a dancer. He could climb trees or run races with the best, but somehow in dancing his feet always seemed in his way. This time, as he and Cora sprang into the center of the group, neither he nor anyone else ever minded his feet at all. The truth was, Cora May, in her tiny slippers, was a veritable thistledown. No one who danced with her could help being infected with something of her own spirit and grace. Forward and back the two went. Then they balanced partners, tiptoed around each other, crossed hands, and finally ended with a whirling waltz all about the pole. The whole thing was such a pretty dainty bit that the children applauded vigorously at the close. Harry and Miss Barton held a whispered consultation for a few minutes. "We have tried to be as impartial," she announced, "as if we were 20 judges instead of 2. Everybody has done beautifully, but we think the prize ought to go to Cora May and Ted." The rest of the children clapped harder than ever as she hung a lovely necklace of blue Venetian beads about Cora's neck and gave Ted a big Japanese kite. Peggy, however, regarded this last donation with some disfavor. "Dick dances lots better than you do," she said to Ted plainly. "It's only because Cora May did so well that no one noticed you." But Ted was quite untroubled. "Of course," he said sweetly. "You don't suppose I was such a goose not to know that, did you? Why, if she had a turkey for partner it wouldn't matter." After the dancing came a hunt for peanuts. They were hidden all over the lawn, in crevices of the stone wall, in an old bird's nest that hung low on a broken limb, under the piazza steps, among the rose bushes, everywhere and anywhere. Then they were all marched down to the orchard. Here beneath the wide branches was a long table set with all kinds of good things to eat. Harry was helped to a chair at the very head. He was allowed also to cut the fairy cake, as Miss Barton called a white frosted affair that filled a big silver salver. Before the first slice was made, she stood in front of it and in a solemn tone repeated these lines: "Cake, O cake of wondrous bake, of thy sweetness we'd partake. Give us each for fairy's sake, gifts thou hast within thy make." Then with a long, slender knife, Harry boldly plunged into the very heart of this white mystery. No wonder Miss Barton called it a fairy cake. What other name was suitable for one whose every slice hid within its yellow creamy sides some little gift? Of course, sometimes a girl found a fine glass agate or a wooden top in her portion. That didn't matter though, for there was always a boy willing to swap for a tiny porcelain doll or pewter pitcher. It only proved that Harry had bestowed the pieces according to his own fancy, rather than as a wise fairy would have dictated. End of chapter 2.